Right, welcome. And just go ahead while we're waiting for everyone to join us. Go ahead and let us know in the chat where you're joining us from and what your favorite thing is about the American barn owl. All right, I'm seeing Noblesville, Floyd County, Warsaw. Welcome. Dubois. All right, I'm seeing a lot more. Seymour, Madison, Peterson, Call and Markings, Birdseye. Had a nest for 4 years. Very cool. Pike County, Marion. Awesome. Welcome. We'll give everyone a couple more minutes to join. I know we had 80 people registered, so quite a number of people interested in talking about the barn owls. So we'll give them a couple more minutes to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, southwestern Marion County, Mount Vernon. Carmel. Yep, California. I'm from Arizona originally, so I've seen a lot of barn owls. All right, we'll give just another minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Southern Jackson. I also see some people talking about their markings. They do have some very cool markings. Hazleton. Heart-shaped faces. Absolutely. All right. Let me go ahead and switch screens and we'll get started. All right, well, you can answer Brad's question first on if you've seen a barn owl in the wild, and then we'll get started. Interested to see how many of you guys have seen one. No? Some yeses, some nos. And then just go ahead and make sure that you're muting when you come in the chat or when you come into the Zoom. Raptor rehabbers, appreciate all the work that you do. Habitat initiative. Yep, we'll be talking all about that, Sarah. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and we'll get started. So I just wanted to introduce myself. I am Sam Orquidez. I am the Bird Programs Manager with Indiana Audubon. We do have some other Indiana Audubon staff. I'll let them introduce themselves. And we do also have some Indiana DNR staff on the call as well, Amy Kearns. So I don't know if you guys want to introduce yourself real quick, and then we can start talking about barn owls.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad to be in the group tonight too. I'm Brad Bumgarner. Those that don't know, I'm the executive director for Indiana Audubon, and this is I think something like our 127th program and initiative that we've been able to develop that is a perfect blend of conservation, education, research, and all the things that people love about birding. So I'm just happy to sit in and learn all about this tonight with you guys.
Awesome. Whitney, I don't know if you're still on the call, if you want to introduce yourself real quick. Maybe we lost Whitney. Amy, I don't know if you want to jump in, just introduce yourself real quick.
Sure. I'm Amy Kearns, assistant ornithologist with the Indiana DNR, and I've been working with barn owls and other endangered bird species in Indiana for about 17 years.
Awesome, thanks, and we're glad to have you. But I'm really excited to talk about our latest and greatest program, the Indiana Barn Owl Initiative. And I just want to introduce Indiana Audubon for those of you who might not be as familiar with us, but we were founded in 1898, making us Indiana's oldest statewide conservation organization. And we actually predate the National Audubon Society by 7 years. So because we predate them, we're actually independent. So a really cool piece of that is that all of the money that we get from memberships, from merchandise sales, from donations, it gets to stay here in Indiana to help conserve habitat for Indiana's birds. And we also own and operate Mary Gray Bird Sanctuary, which is around 700 acres of habitat over in Connorsville. So I don't know if anyone on the call is in that area, but I highly suggest checking it out if you haven't. But talking about barn owls, so the Indiana Barn Owl Initiative, it is a collaboration between the Indiana DNR and Indiana Audubon. And our mission is to educate people on this state-endangered bird, increase awareness about some of the threats that barn owls face, increase nesting opportunities across the state, as well as conserve habitat for these birds, as well as all the other species that utilize the same habitat. So getting into the barn owl and how to identify them, I know there were a number of people on the call who said that they've never seen them before. So some key identifying features of barn owls, they are from the genus Tyto, and they have typically a pale heart-shaped face with dark eyes, like you can see in this picture. They have relatively long, scaly legs and no ear tufts. So unlike the great horned owl or the long-eared owl or the short-eared owl, you're not going to see any ear tufts on these guys. They're also a medium-sized owl, so bigger than our eastern screech owl, our northern saw-whet owl, but they're going to be smaller than our great horned owl or our barred owls. They're also white in color, pretty pale owl, so they have that white underneath and then buffy light brown upper parts, like you can kind of see split in this picture. So a little bit darker on the top. And females tend to be darker in coloration than the males. So seeing a barn owl is one way to identify if they're utilizing your property or if they're in the area, but there are also some other ways to identify these birds and identify if they're using your property or if they're in the area. So one of the really great ways to do that is by sound. So barn owls, they make really distinct shrieks and screams, so they don't hoot like some other owls. And I'll go ahead and I'll play that for you guys. So I really hope you guys can hear this. Let me just change screens really quickly. But they have a very distinct screech, and it's kind of ghostly sounding. So I'll go ahead and I'll play that for you guys now. Was everybody able to hear that? Awesome. Great. So very different than some of the other owls that we have here in Indiana. Again, a little bit more of a shriek than a hoot. Another way to identify if they're utilizing an area is if you happen to find any barn owl feathers. So these are going to be pale since it is a rather pale bird with either buffy, brown, or gray markings. And the females typically have a little bit darker coloration on their feathers and a little bit more apparent spots on the feathers. And I'll show you guys some pictures of those on the next slide. Another way to identify if they're utilizing an area is if you happen upon an owl pellet. Now, I won't say that these are easy to find, but if you do find one, some ways to tell if it's from a barn owl is their pellets tend to be cylindrical in shape and have kind of rounded ends. They also tend to be a lot darker in color than some other birds that make pellets or other owl species that we have here in Indiana. And I'll show some pictures and comparisons of those in just a couple slides. So looking at these feathers, you can see some of the differences between the males and the females. So again, typically a pale color kind of has an ombre effect almost, with that kind of brownish color to the more gray color. And again, with the females, you can see a little bit darker in coloration and more prominent of those markings on the feathers. I do want to make note that barn owls are protected under the Migratory Bird Act, meaning that collecting their feathers is illegal unless you have proper permits. So if you do happen to find a barn owl feather on your property, feel free to take pictures, but please don't collect them unless you have that proper permitting. Like I mentioned, they do create pellets, which are a little bit different than some other owls that create pellets. I do want to make note that I did pull this from the Barn Owl Survey's website, which is located in the UK. So there are some birds on here that we don't have here in Indiana. We don't have the tawny owl, the little owl, or the jackdaw, but you can kind of see how the barn owl pellets are in coloration and shape in comparison to these other birds. So you can see what I mean by they're a little bit more round, a little bit more cylindrical, and much darker in color. And that coloration mostly comes from the fur. Barn owls eat a lot of rodents. So that's kind of what we're going to see is a lot of hair and a lot of bones, predominantly from rodents. So we're not going to typically see insect parts or other type of animal bones, no seeds, anything like that, like we might see with some other birds. But talking about the barn owls that we get to see here in Indiana, the barn owl that we have here is the American barn owl. So barn owls of the genus Tyto are actually found worldwide. There are 28 subspecies found all around the globe. They're found on every continent except for Antarctica, so a very widespread species. Although North America only has the one subspecies, the American barn owl, or Tyto furcata. And I do hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sure Amy can correct me if I'm wrong. But Indiana is actually at the northern edge of the American barn owl's range in North America. So we can see Indiana right there. And part of the reason for that is that barn owls tend to struggle in colder climates because these guys, they don't do super well when there's prolonged snow cover. It can make it really hard for them to find enough food. And so we tend to see them a little bit further south, and that's kind of why their range is cut off toward that northern part of the United States. Just because when there's that prolonged snow cover, they're not able to find the food that they need, so they're just not able to continue to remain in those environments. But talking specifically about barn owls here in Indiana, so we had the first report, and I'll call it the official report of barn owls in Indiana in 1879. I'm sure that they were hanging out in Indiana a lot longer before that, but that's our first official reporting. And unfortunately, we did have a sharp decline in their numbers in the 1960s, and that was due to a lot of different factors. We had habitat loss of their nesting habitat and opportunities. Widespread pesticide and rodenticide use also added to that, as well as poaching incidences. So because of all those reasons, we had a really sharp decline in barn owls here in Indiana in the 1960s. But since 1984, biologists with the DNR have monitored barn owls and done what they could to continue conserving their habitat and providing additional nesting opportunities. So to provide those additional nesting opportunities, since the 1980s, around 360 nesting boxes have been installed across the state to try and provide that nesting opportunity for barn owls. Although annually, there's still less than around 100 barn owl nests reported annually. And the majority of those nests are going to be in that southwestern part of the state. We can see from the nesting density on this map just how concentrated that can be. But the DNR those efforts have not been without avail. So we can see in this map from 2017, we do have quite a number of occupied nests in that southwestern part of the state, and then a few outliers further north. And when we compare it to the map from 2022, we can see just that huge increase in just a couple of years. So providing those nesting opportunities and conserving the habitat is really creating meaningful change and allowing for barn owls to continue to establish here in Indiana. Although they do continue to face challenges. Here in Indiana, they suffer from habitat loss and degradation. These guys need really large areas of habitat, and I'll talk about that more in the next slide, what type of habitat these guys are utilizing. The loss of nesting opportunities as these more old growth forests and those trees that have cavities that they would have nested in are being cleared out. They're losing those more historic nesting opportunities. And as agricultural areas continue to change and barns and silos are torn down, they're also losing those more man-made nesting opportunities as well. Pesticide use, particularly rodenticide use, can be pretty detrimental to these guys, considering that rodents make up such a huge part of their diet, as well as other owls. So other larger owls like the great horned owl or the barred owl will actually eat barn owls. So in areas where those guys' habitats overlap, we do tend to see barn owls' numbers decrease because of that. So talking more about their habitat, like I mentioned, these guys require really large open areas. And when I say that, I mean over 100 acres. They need really large areas. And the habitat that they're going to be mainly utilizing is large open areas, so grassland, pastures, hayfields, wet meadows, and marshy habitats. If we think over about Goose Pond in the southwestern part of the state, that wetland, marshy area is really great habitat for these guys. And it's a great habitat because it can persist those really large numbers of rodents that these guys are eating. Which brings me to talking about their diet. So barn owls are nocturnal hunters, which means that they're most active at night. And typically people are seeing them at dusk and dawn. And the majority of their diet, like I mentioned, is going to be small rodents. So they're eating those prairie voles, house mice, deer mice, shrews. That's going to be the majority of their diet. But they will also eat other small animals, especially if they're in an area where rodents are scarce or they're just not able to find the large numbers of rodents that they need. And if that's the case, they'll eat reptiles, amphibians, other smaller birds like house sparrows or starlings, whatever they can. But again, they're typically going to prefer eating rodents whenever they can. And it's really important that their nesting areas be near habitat that can support these large quantities of prey, because these guys actually produce lots of babies, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But barn owl nests, they can be in those natural cavities or hollows. Like I mentioned, cavities in trees or caves is where historically they were nesting, but they'll also nest in more man-made structures. So barns, silos, human-made nesting boxes are where we're typically going to find barn owl nests nowadays, particularly here in Indiana. And their nesting behavior, they have a relatively long breeding season, which can go from March to October. And they can nest multiple times a year, depending on how much food is available. And those clutch sizes can be rather large, anywhere from 3 to 11 eggs. So that's why a couple of these pictures, you're going to see just a whole bunch of baby barn owls all crammed into these nesting boxes, because their mom probably laid a whole bunch of eggs. Although generally only 3 to 4 of those owlets are going to survive that nesting period. Unfortunately, we live in a survival of the fittest type world, so those parents are just going to feed the strongest chicks, and unfortunately, only the strongest ones are going to make it to adulthood. And once they reach that adulthood, once they fledge and leave the nest, that's typically going to be at about 8 to 10 weeks of age. And they're going to disperse, and dispersal can be anywhere from around 5 miles away to hundreds of miles away. It really just depends on the habitat availability, the nesting opportunities in the surrounding area. Which is why it's so important that we continue to provide these nesting opportunities for the next generation of barn owls. And that's how the Barn Owl Initiative actually works. So I'll walk you through the steps. And I know everybody wants a barn owl box on their property. They're really cool birds, and it's really cool that you get to see them nest and raise their babies. But before you fill out an application, please make sure that your property meets those minimum requirements. And it is listed on the application itself, but I'll go ahead and I'll go over them once again so we're all kind of on the same page. So one of those requirements is that the property contains a barn or a similar structure for the nesting box to be installed within. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the nesting boxes look like, but our nesting boxes are made to be installed within a larger structure. So it's really important that a barn or similar structure is on the property already, so that barn can, or that nesting box can be installed within. Another minimum requirement is that whoever owns that structure is okay with a 6x6 hole being cut in the side so that the barn owls can actually go in and access that nesting box, which will be installed inside the structure. And then lastly, and most importantly, is that you have at least 100 acres of usable habitat for these barn owls. Like I mentioned, it's really important that they have these really huge areas that could sustain really large numbers of rodents so they can continue to raise that next generation of barn owls. So if your property meets those minimum requirements and you think it would be a really great place for barn owls to raise their young, you can go ahead and fill out an application. And that application is located on our website. And I'll also be including a QR code at the very end of this presentation, so you can just scan it there. So once you fill out an application, if your property fits those minimum requirements, that's when site selection will begin. So sites will be selected and notified by fall of this year, and sites are going to be selected based on nesting success. So if you fill out an application and your site isn't selected, please don't feel bad. We're just selecting sites based on the potential for the barn owls to have the most successful nesting opportunity they possibly could have. And after site selection comes installation and monitoring. So nesting boxes will be installed and coordinated by the Indiana DNR, and nesting boxes will be monitored around every 5 years. So it's also important, if you're filling out these applications, that you're okay with the DNR coming in and checking on this nesting box every around 5 years to make sure that, barn owls are using it and that everything is going okay. As for the nesting boxes themselves, here's what they look like. And I wanted to give a shout out to Paul Labovitz for putting these together for us. We could not have done this without his support. So these boxes are around 1.5 feet by 3 feet in length. So relatively large nesting boxes. Again, barn owls can lay up to 11 eggs. So we need a lot of space in these nesting boxes for all the babies. And there's also, as you can see here, a little door so that the DNR can go ahead and check on these nesting boxes, see what's going on inside without disturbing the nesting box itself. And if you're interested in building your own nesting box, the DNR does include instructions on how to do that on their barn owl website. As for the monitoring itself, it takes place in the winter so that we disturb the owls the least amount as possible. And the monitoring allows for those boxes to be cleaned and repaired. I'm sure you can imagine all those baby barn owls make a huge mess. So it can be important that we get in there and clean it out whenever we need to. And those periodic nest checks, again, done by DNR staff, will typically take place every 3 to 5 years to see if barn owls are utilizing the nesting box, what's going on in there, if there's babies, and that's when banding will typically take place. So how to know if you should apply. So the first and most important piece is habitat. Like I mentioned, barn owls require huge areas of habitat, over 100 acres of these open habitat. So that could be pasture, grasslands, hay fields, agricultural land, or similar really large open habitat. The next is nesting opportunity. Again, you're going to need that barn or similar structure so that nesting box can be installed within it. There are nesting boxes out there that can be installed on poles, but those aren't the nesting boxes that we have. Ours need a larger structure in order to be installed within. And then location is another important thing that we're considering. Like I mentioned, barn owls can have a harder time further north. They can be sensitive to the cold, and therefore are more common in southern Indiana. So we do have some key counties that we are targeting, but I'll let Amy talk a little bit more about that at the end if you have specific questions. And lastly is barn owl presence. So when we're reviewing applications, we are going to give preference to locations that can prove that barn owls are already using the property. So if you have pictures of a barn owl on your property, pictures of barn owl feathers, owl pellets, anything like that, please include that in your application because it will give you a significant boost. So not all of us can host barn owl nesting boxes on our property, but there are lots of other ways to continue to support this initiative. So you could always donate, of course, to Indiana Audubon or the Indiana Non-Game Fund to help support statewide conservation efforts for birds like the American barn owl and other vulnerable wildlife. You could always sponsor a nesting box. So the cost of building the box and the installation is around $350 if you're able to cover that full cost. I'm sure these little baby barn owls would definitely appreciate it. Another way you could support is by symbolic owl adoptions. So we do have adoptions listed on our Square site now, and the adoptions come with a certificate, an exclusive annual update on how the process is going, all of the benefits of this initiative, as well as one of our barn owl tote bags. And last, but certainly not least, you could always support by buying Barn Owl Initiative merch, which can be located on the Indiana Audubon Square site. I know I'm wearing mine today, if you can't see, but we have shirts, stickers, tote bags, and all of you today get an exclusive code, Swoop and Save, for 15% off any Barn Owl purchases. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. There's that QR code that I mentioned, and Brad and Amy are also on here if you guys have any specific questions for them. I think you're muted, Amy, if you're talking. Okay. Karen asked if the barn could be three-sided.
I can take that one. I actually really love installing boxes in pole barns or like a three-sided barn, especially ones that are made of metal. It's a piece of cake to get a box up in a barn like that, and a super good type of box to have a super great barn to have a box in. I really like the metal siding. I think it's very hard for mammals to climb up metal siding. So I think the box is very safe. And then we can set our ladders up on the ground in a pole barn, and it's very safe for us when we're installing the box. So yeah, three-sided barn is great for a barn owl nest box.
All right, Bruce is asking how close boxes be placed. He has an active nest on his property. Could he add another one?
They can have overlapping territories. So as long as there's enough food for everybody, that should be fine. But I would probably give it some space, like a half mile if you can. But you know, if you can't get it that far apart, you could try it and see what happens. If you don't get another pair of barn owls, you could always end up with another good species like the American kestrel, which is another grassland species that's in decline that nests in barn owl nest boxes.
And then I saw one earlier from Alec asking about if you have to own all 100 acres, and I'm sure that's a question that a lot of people had. So I just wanted to note that Amy already answered it in the chat. No, you don't have to own the land. You just have to have that open area adjacent to the nesting box. Okay, Kimberly asked, will barn owls drive away other birds that might be nesting in the barn?
Yeah, they seem to. I've seen other landowners who have a nest box with barn owls in it have told me that they don't have pigeons around now that there are barn owls. But I wouldn't rely on barn owls as like a species to drive away pigeons. I think that would be tricky. But yeah, it's possible that they might impact the birds that are in the barn besides them.
Cynthia asked, does it have to be relatively quiet and little activity in the area for a nesting box?
Not at all. We have a lot of nest boxes on active farms that have tractors, livestock, people. And if the birds are not disturbed inside their nesting box, then all of that is compatible. The owls know that they are safe inside their box, that nobody is going to pop in and scare them. And they get used to all of those sounds. So it ends up working out really well to have a nest box, even if the farm is active, including loud noises like tractors. I'm always very surprised at that, but it seems like it works out really well. I've actually watched owls on camera while there's loud noises and activity in the barn, and they didn't even appear to wake up. I'm sure that they're aware, but they didn't act differently.
Okay, Bruce asked about solar farms, if we know if they're good or bad for barn owls.
I mean, that's a loaded question. I would say there are always positive things with green energy for everybody on the planet. But like I think there is a direct negative impact. I don't think that barn owls are likely to hunt in solar fields. But I think we need more research on that. I hope I'm wrong, but I say that because we don't usually see barn owls hunting in places like a woodland. They prefer it to be open. They're not going to be zooming around trees or anything like that. They hunt over the ground. So like if you are someone who doesn't see barn owls a lot, in Indiana, we don't see barn owls hunting because they're nocturnal and they're rare. But if you can picture the way a northern harrier hunts, so northern harrier are pretty common in the winter, especially in Indiana, and they fly low over the ground and they're listening. As they fly, they're listening for birds and small mammals. A barn owl hunts in the same way. They're a lot of time cruising around, listening as they fly. And so if you have solar farms in your area, just take a look yourself. Do you see harriers? If you don't see harriers, there's probably not barn owls there.
Thank you. And David asked about height requirements. I'm assuming this is about the barn height or the whatever structure they're utilizing.
Yeah, I think, 10 feet, I think is a really nice height. If you can get it up higher, I think that's better. But like I was saying earlier, we have a lot of boxes in pole barns that are occupied. And I know of boxes that are as low as 8 feet that are occupied. I think they prefer it to be up higher. So if you can get a little higher, that's better. But I think you can try even if the box is as low as 8 or 10 feet.
And someone asked about concerns about nesting boxes near poultry production facilities, wondering about rodenticide use.
You can always try to put a box up, and then if you're seeing a lot of mortality, then you can take it down.
All right, that's all the questions I'm seeing in the chat. And Brad shared a fun little game that he put together where you can be a barn owl foraging for voles. But if anyone has any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat or just go ahead and unmute, and we're happy to answer them.
Hi, Sam and gang. I'm Matt and my little tribe down here. We're on a farm in southern Indiana, right in the Ohio River, Perry County. We've had barn owls, gosh, as long as I can remember, in a couple of different outbuildings. We've got a bunch of, 7 different outbuildings that date back 150 years old, I guess. And this year, or this winter, right now, is probably the first spring that I can remember that we don't have or I haven't found a nesting pair. Last year we hatched, I think, 5, the best I could tell, and the year before 4. And I'm wondering, I don't know, is there any kind of population track, or I feel like I'm pretty versed on barn owls and what they do, and it's great to go out and listen to them.
Yeah.
Like right at dusk. And this year I have nothing, and I'm quite surprised and disappointed.
I wouldn't worry too much about it, Matt. because we do see where sometimes we'll have barn owls at a site for many years and then they are not there for a little while and then they're back again. So because you've had them for so long, I suspect that you'll get them again. The reason you might not have them now, they're pretty rare overall. So sometimes when there is a pair somewhere and one of or both die, it might take a little while before another pair finds the area and moves in. And it could be related to the winter. We did have some pretty harsh weather this winter, including extended snow cover. I think that was back in January. There was a period of time, it was like over a week, we had a lot of snow on the ground. And this species is sensitive to cold weather and to snow. And so I suspect that some of the numbers might be down this year. I guess we'll see. However, before this year, we did have a population that was growing. So even if we have a lower year this year, I think that they will be back again, hopefully next year. I hope that eases your concerns.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And
Mhm.
I do have a question. Wonder if anybody, if you guys, barn owl experts, have looked at any relationship between black-headed vultures and barn
Mhm.
owls. And I ask that because over the past, I don't know, especially the past year, maybe 2 years, we've seen the black-headed vultures, and I don't have livestock, um, but I have great barn owl habitat. But the black-headed vultures have, I don't increased in numbers 100-fold. Any given day, there's probably 10 sitting out on the barn. Other days, there's maybe 30 or 50 sitting out there. And I don't know, I want to relate my decrease in barn owls to something. Have
Yeah,
you seen that or looked at that at all?
I feel like there could be something going on there because black vultures also nest in barns. So I'm not sure where your barn owls were nesting, but if they were both in the hayloft, I could imagine maybe they wouldn't want to be neighbors. And one way to give the barn owls a better habitat away from the vultures would be a nest box. So I don't know if you have a nest box, if you would like one. Um, we could get you a nest box in your barn, and that will give the owls a safe place where they can be that a bigger bird cannot get into. So the hole in the wall of the barn is 6 inches by 6 inches. So anything bigger than that cannot get in. So a black vulture could not get into the nest box. And then you could have black vultures nesting in the hayloft, and you could have barn owls in the nest box in the barn without any conflict.
Yeah, that sounds good. Interesting. Before the black-headed vultures came in, we had plenty of good old-fashioned red-headed vultures. And gosh, I wish I had a picture of this, but we had red-headed vultures and barn owls living in the same, it was an attic of an old house. Unfortunately, I don't have pictures, but it seems like the black-headed vultures have also driven away the red-headed vultures.
Yeah. I think they do the same when they're foraging. They're just a little more aggressive. And if there's turkey vulture and black vulture at the same carcass, then a lot of the time the black vulture will come out on top because they are just a little more aggressive when they're foraging. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were the same at a nest site. Although I don't know, I haven't actually seen that happen. I just know they use the same habitat. I have not seen turkey and black vultures in a hayloft. I've always seen one or the other. So it makes sense to me that they wouldn't want to be neighbors.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Matt, Amy threw her email in the chat. Since you have had barn owls nest on your property before, she said feel free to email her and contact her directly. Any other questions? And I see Brad is throwing in a plug for our Goose Pond birding weekends, potential to see barn owls if you've never seen them in the wild before. So, Sarah, I didn't mention any counties that were key counties, but we are tending to target more southwestern part of the state. Although, if you have seen barn owls on your property before, definitely feel free to apply. Any other questions? And yes, super special thanks to Paul for all of his time and effort on those boxes. Much appreciated.
Hey, this is Matt again. I have
Yeah.
some questions. So, about 5 years ago, I tried to get into the regenerative agriculture. I guess I didn't try. I'm all in. And part of my plan is to use barn owls, since we had a bunch of them down here, as my rodent control. And it seems to be working. We have northern harriers and kestrels, probably my two favorite birds of prey, along with the barn owls. And last year I bought it's a plastic box from barnowls.com, maybe. You guys familiar with their double two layers, protects heat? I think they're
Yeah.
made in California.
Those are really
Um,
well made. I like those a lot. And barn owls seem like they like them too. Did they ever use it or have you
so
installed it yet?
I actually have three up on poles, and I've had them up 6 months to about 9 months, and I haven't seen any barn owls in them yet. I think we caught a spider last time we looked about a month ago, and that was it. So my question is, have you seen these work in Indiana, and are you happy with them?
Yeah, I think that if you're going to install a pole mounted barn owl box, that is the exact kind I would use. And I have seen where barn owls are using those boxes in Indiana. Yeah, I really like those boxes. I think they're very well made. I think they're pretty easy to install. I really like that that double-sided, and then I like that they're made of plastic. And the reason is not only are they lightweight, so they're easier to install, but I've seen where bees are in the wooden boxes that are on poles. So we've installed a lot of wooden boxes, and they've had very, very low success rates. And they don't last very long when they're outside in the rain and the heat. And I keep seeing that the bees really like the wooden pole mounted boxes. And if you have a hive of bees in your wooden barn owl box, it is not going to last long. The heat, humidity, the stickiness, they fall apart. So I think you made a really good investment. And I suspect that you will have barn owls in those boxes, at least one of them. If you have three up, it just seems very good odds that you'll have barn owls in one of those boxes. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. I'll let you know. Or you
Do you
guys
have
need
them
to
on
come down.
poles?
They're on a
Do you have
pole.
them on
Yeah,
poles? Okay.
a 10-foot pole.
Okay. We could do an experiment and install a box in your barn, and then we'll see which one gets occupied first.
Yeah, it'd be great.
And then Matt, could you just repeat, or Amy, repeat the name of that company? We had some people asking in the chat.
I can put it,
Uh,
I'll put it in the link.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
and if I throw them a bone, I don't want to take anything away from Paul, but if I throw them a bone, I talked to, I can't remember the owl researcher. I think he started his career in Pennsylvania, if I remember right. I talked to him on the phone, and I talked to a couple other women on the phone out there in California, and they could not have been more helpful. And I don't know if how much I should divulge, but they really hooked me up on pricing. I bought three, but it was not their advertised price. It was a whole lot less.
That's a really great tip. I love that. Helping us out because they are very pricey. They are quality product though. So I think it's worth it. But that's great information.
Any other questions? All right. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you guys for all attending. And please, if your property is fitting those minimum requirements, please go ahead, fill out an application, and we'll be in touch. And again, there's also lots of other ways to continue to support. Brad, can you throw that little 15% off in the chat again? So if anyone wants to rock some barn owl merch, they have that discount code. All right. Well, thank you guys for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Bye. Thank you, Sam.
Bye. Thanks,
Thank you,
Amy.
everybody.
Thank
That was
you.
awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
So long.